People often believe that a story ends the moment you walk away. They think that once the villain is defeated or the toxic family is left behind, the screen fades to black and nothing else happens. But real life does not have a credit sequence. The years keep moving, and sometimes the universe has a very precise, ironic way of showing you exactly how the scales have balanced. 3 years passed after I hung up that final video call with my family. 3 years of absolute, uninterrupted peace. Julian and I did not just build a beautiful marriage, we built an empire. We combined his architectural expertise with my operational logistics to launch our own boutique event design firm. Without the suffocating weight of my family constantly draining my energy, my career exploded. We went from planning small, intimate weddings to orchestrating massive, high-profile corporate galas and charity events across the country. I was respected, I was highly paid, and most importantly, I was free. I had not heard a single word from my parents or Vanessa since that night. I knew from distant mutual acquaintances that my parents had moved into a small apartment in a completely different city, too ashamed to show their faces in their old social circles. I knew Vanessa's divorce from Preston had been brutal, leaving her with massive legal debt and absolutely no spousal support, because Preston's lawyers had easily proven she brought zero financial assets into the short-lived marriage. But I never dug for the details. I simply did not care anymore. Until a crisp Friday afternoon in October. My firm had been hired to produce the annual gala for a massive pediatric research foundation. It was a $3 million production held at the city's Museum of Modern Art. I was the executive director of the event. I was standing on the loading dock behind the museum, wearing a tailored black suit, a headset resting over one ear, holding a clipboard as I checked in the final vendor deliveries before the red carpet opened. We were waiting on a secondary floral supplier, a wholesale vendor hired strictly to provide bulk greenery for the entrance arches. A plain, unmarked white delivery van backed into the loading bay, 10 minutes behind schedule. I checked my watch, feeling a brief flash of irritation. The driver, a gruff older man, hopped out and opened the rear doors. "Sorry we are late, ma'am," he called out to me. "My assistant will start unloading the water buckets right now." A woman stepped out of the passenger side of the van. She was wearing a faded gray polo shirt with the wholesale company's logo embroidered on the chest, stained with water spots. Her hair was tied back in a messy, practical ponytail. She reached into the back of the van, grunting as she hauled out two heavy, sloshing, galvanized buckets filled with wet floral foam and eucalyptus branches. She turned around and began walking up the concrete ramp toward me. She stopped dead in her tracks. The water in the buckets sloshed over the edges, splashing onto her canvas sneakers, but she did not seem to notice. Her face went completely pale. It was Vanessa. For 10 long, agonizing seconds, the loading dock was completely silent except for the hum of the museum's generator. I looked at the woman who had once stood in a custom silk gown, drinking champagne paid for with my stolen grandmother's trust fund. The woman who had laughed when my mother called me dirt. The woman who had stolen my designs to fake a life of luxury she never earned. Now she was hauling dirty water buckets for a minimum wage vendor at an event that I was running. I could see the frantic calculations happening in her eyes, the shock, the utter, devastating humiliation. She looked at my tailored suit. She looked at the headset, the clipboard, the team of event staff waiting behind me for my instructions. She realized, in that one agonizing moment, the massive, insurmountable gap between our lives. She opened her mouth. Her lips trembled. I think she wanted to say my name, or maybe she wanted to turn around and run back to the van. I did not let her do either. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I did not offer her a dramatic monologue about karma. I looked at her with the exact same polite, sterile professionalism I would offer to any other delivery worker. I tapped my pen against the clipboard. "The staging area for the bulk greenery is through the double doors. Take an immediate left down the service hallway," I said, my voice perfectly level. "Please ensure the floor is wiped down if any water spills. We have a strict safety protocol for this venue." Vanessa swallowed hard. A deep, flushed red color crept up her neck, staining her cheeks, the golden child, completely stripped of her crown. She lowered her eyes to the concrete floor. "Yes, ma'am," she whispered. She walked past me, carrying the heavy buckets, her shoulders slumped under the weight. I watched her disappear through the service doors. I did not feel a rush of vindictive joy. I did not feel the need to call Julian and brag about what I had just seen. I just felt a profound sense of closure. People who rely entirely on manipulation, theft, and appearances will eventually find themselves standing empty-handed in the real world. They spend their lives building facades, terrified of the day the wind will blow it all down. But when you build your life on hard work, resilience, and genuine character, no one can ever dismantle your foundation. My mother was right about one thing all those years ago at the dinner table. She said that diamonds and gravel do not hold the same value. She thought she was insulting me. She thought she was telling me I was worthless. But diamonds are just fragile, expensive rocks meant to be looked at. They serve no practical purpose other than vanity. Gravel is what you use to build roads. Gravel is what you pour into the earth to create a solid, unbreakable foundation that can withstand any storm. It holds the weight of empires. I turned my back to the loading dock, pressed the button on my headset to signal my team that we were ready to begin, and walked inside to run my masterpiece. I left Vanessa behind me, exactly where she belonged. In the past, every household has a center of gravity. In ours, it was a massive, oxblood leather scrapbook that my mother kept prominently displayed on the glass coffee table in the living room. She called it the family archive. In reality, it was a monument to the son she always wanted, and a graveyard for the daughter she wished she could erase. If you opened that heavy leather cover, you would find Jackson. Pages and pages of Jackson. His middle school participation certificates were meticulously laminated. His aggressively average report cards were framed with gold foil stickers. There were glossy 8x10 photos of him at his high school prom, at his community college graduation, and standing proudly in front of his first used car. And me? You had to dig to the very back of the book, past the blank pages, to find any trace of Harper. My college valedictorian speech was nowhere to be found. Instead, there was a single, slightly out-of-focus picture of me at 16, and beneath it, my mother had written in her neat, looping cursive, "Harper, always reading something in her room." The family archive was not just a book. It was the physical manifestation of how my mother curated reality. As we grew older, the lies in that book and in her daily conversations only grew more extravagant. Let us talk about Jackson. Jackson is a pleasant guy. He has a great smile and a firm handshake. But he is not the corporate titan my mother paints him to be. For the last 4 years, Jackson has worked as a shift manager at a local shipping and logistics warehouse. It is honest, hard work. There is absolutely no shame in it. He makes the schedules, he oversees the loading docks, and he goes home. But that was not glamorous enough for Evelyn. To hear her tell it at her weekly book club, or to the women at the country club she was desperately trying to join, Jackson was a regional operations director for a multinational logistics firm. She bought him expensive tailored suits for Christmas and forced him to take photos in front of downtown high-rises just so she could post them online with captions like, "So proud of my executive son closing another huge quarter." The craziest part? Jackson just went along with it. At first, he would look a little embarrassed, but soon he started wearing the fake title like a comfortable coat. He liked the admiration. He liked being the golden child. He liked the fact that when Olivia, a smart, ambitious nurse from a wealthy family, came into the picture, my mother handed him a ready-made executive persona to impress her. While Jackson was playing dress-up in my mother's fantasy world, I was clawing my way through the brutal reality of the Chicago journalism scene. I did not have a wealthy family backing me. I had a mountain of student debt and a burning desire to drag the truth into the light. Because when you spend your entire childhood watching someone build an empire of lies, you develop a borderline obsession with the truth. I started out fetching coffee and transcribing terrible audio files for senior reporters. I worked 80-hour weeks. I slept under my desk. I took the assignments no one else wanted, digging through decades of municipal public records, tracing shell companies, and interviewing people who had been silenced and forgotten. Slowly, I built a name for myself. I became an investigative reporter for one of the most respected papers in the Midwest. I won regional awards. I put corrupt landlords and city officials behind bars. I thought, foolishly, that maybe success would finally earn me a spot in the family archive. The day I got my first front-page Sunday feature, I drove 3 hours back home to hand-deliver a copy of the paper to my mother. I walked into the kitchen, my heart pounding with that pathetic, childlike hope, and placed the newspaper on the island counter. "Look," I said. I wrote the cover story. My mother barely glanced at it. She pushed it aside to make room for a tray of appetizers she was preparing. "Oh, that is nice, Harper. Listen, Jackson is bringing Olivia over later. Can you make sure your car is parked down the street? I do not want her parents thinking we have junk vehicles in the driveway." My car was a 5-year-old sedan. It was perfectly fine. But it was not a luxury SUV. That was the moment the final cord snapped. I realized that my accomplishments were a threat to her. A daughter who investigated fraud for a living was a direct danger to a mother who lived a fraudulent life. So, she downgraded me. To her friends, to our extended family, and eventually to Olivia's parents, I was just poor Harper, the socially awkward girl who struggled in the city, doing mindless data entry in a cubicle, barely scraping by. It made Jackson look even better by comparison. The wildly successful brother and the tragic, unremarkable sister. I stopped trying to show her my articles. I stopped talking about my life. I let her have her narrative because fighting it felt like screaming into a hurricane. But I did not know that my life's work was about to crash directly into her perfectly curated world. I did not know that the biggest investigation of my career, the one that had consumed my life for the past year, was about to put me face to face with the exact man my mother was trying to impress. Because the man who presided over the massive federal corruption case I had just blown wide open was none other than Judge Harrison Sterling. For 8 grueling months, my entire existence was reduced to a claustrophobic, windowless office at the newspaper, stacks of heavily redacted property deeds, and burner phones. I was not writing fluff pieces. I was tracking a massive, deeply entrenched real estate corruption ring that went all the way up to the mayor's office. High-ranking city officials were using shell companies to forcefully evict low-income families, tear down their neighborhoods, and build luxury developments, pocketing millions in illegal kickbacks along the way. It was dangerous work. I had my tires slashed once. I received anonymous voicemails telling me to drop the story if I wanted to keep walking on 2 functional legs. But the intimidation only proved I was digging in the right place. When my exposé finally dropped, it hit Chicago like a seismic event. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for the people in power. The FBI stepped in, and the resulting indictments landed right on the desk of a man known for his absolute zero-tolerance approach to public corruption, Federal Judge Harrison Sterling. Judge Sterling was a legend in the legal community. He was brilliant, uncompromising, and terrifyingly perceptive. He was the one who reviewed my investigative dossier, the hundreds of pages of financial records and whistleblower testimonies I had compiled, and used them as the foundation to sign off on a wave of federal search warrants. During the preliminary hearings, I sat in the back row of the gallery every single day. I watched Judge Sterling systematically dismantle the high-priced defense lawyers who tried to protect the corrupt officials. He was a force of nature. And I noticed more than once that his sharp, assessing eyes would scan the courtroom and linger on me, sitting quietly with my reporter's notebook. The encounter that changed everything happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The courtroom had cleared out after a particularly brutal session. I was packing my laptop into my bag in the empty marble hallway, exhausted but running on the pure adrenaline of seeing justice actually being served. I heard the heavy, rhythmic tap of leather shoes approaching. I looked up, and there was Judge Sterling. He was not wearing his robes, just a sharply tailored charcoal suit, but he carried the same immense gravity. I froze, unsure of the protocol, but he stopped right in front of me and extended his hand. "Harper," he said. His voice was quieter than in the courtroom, but just as commanding. I am Judge Sterling. I know who you are, Your Honor, I replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, his eye contact unwavering. I have read every word of your reporting on this syndicate, he told me. The meticulous nature of your research, the courage it took to follow the money when they actively tried to frighten you off. It is rare. You did the public a massive service, Harper. It takes a spine of steel to look monsters in the eye and write down their names. Do not ever lose that edge. He gave me a brief, respectful nod and walked away down the corridor. I stood there in the quiet hallway, clutching my bag to my chest. A federal judge. A man who held the fate of the city's most powerful people in his hands had just stopped to tell me I was brave. I wanted to cry. I wanted to call someone and shout it from the rooftops. I pulled out my phone, hovering my thumb over my mother's contact name. For one foolish, desperate second, I thought, maybe this is it. Maybe this is big enough to make her proud. I did not make the call. I knew better. I took the train home to my small apartment, ordered takeout, and let myself bask in the quiet pride of a job well done. But reality has a vicious way of reminding you where you come from. At 9 o'clock that same night, my phone rang. It was not my mother. It was Thomas, my father. My father is a man who has spent 30 years perfecting the art of being invisible. He avoids conflict like the plague, preferring to sit in his recliner and let Evelyn steamroll over everything and everyone, as long as it keeps the peace in his house. A call from him was incredibly rare. "Harper, kiddo," he said. His voice was low, carrying that nervous, hushed quality, like he was hiding in the garage so my mother would not hear him. "Hi, Dad. Is everything okay?" I asked, the warmth from the courthouse still lingering in my chest. "Listen, your brother's dinner is this Friday, the engagement thing. I need to ask you a favor," he stammered, clearly deeply uncomfortable. "Your mother is a wreck about this. Olivia's parents are coming. The dad is a big shot judge or something." My stomach dropped. The warmth vanished, replaced by a cold, familiar dread. "I know, Dad. Mom already called me." "Did she tell you the rules?" he asked, letting out a heavy sigh. "Harper, please. Just do what she asks. Do not talk about the newspaper. Do not talk about your investigations. If they ask, just tell them you work in an office doing paperwork, data entry, whatever." "Dad," I whispered, staring at my reflection in the dark kitchen window. "I literally just took down a massive corruption ring. A federal judge thanked me today. Why do I have to lie about my own life to make Jackson look better?" "Because Jackson needs this," my father snapped, a sudden panicked edge to his voice. "He is marrying into a serious family, Harper. He needs to look like he comes from a stable, normal, quiet background. Your mother thinks your job is too aggressive. It makes people uncomfortable. It makes us look like we are surrounded by crime and drama. Just swallow your pride for one evening, please. For me. Do not make a scene. Do not make a scene." The 4 words that had defined my entire existence in that family. I closed my eyes. The whiplash was nauseating. At 2 in the afternoon, I was a hero with a spine of steel. At 9 at night, I was an aggressive liability who needed to be hidden in the basement so the golden child could shine. "Fine, Dad," I said, my voice completely hollow. "I will be the data entry girl. Tell Mom not to worry." I hung up the phone. I looked at the gray sweater dress my mother had ordered me to wear, still hanging on the closet door. I did not know then that the big shot judge my father was so terrified of was the exact same man who had shaken my hand in the courthouse hallway. I just knew that I was walking into a trap, and that brings us to Friday night, to the cocktail hour before the dinner, because before the explosion at the table, my mother had to set the stage, and she did it by trying to turn me into the hired help. I arrived at my parents' house in the suburbs 2 hours before the dinner was scheduled to begin. I was wearing the gray sweater dress. It was shapeless, heavy, and the color of wet concrete. It did exactly what my mother wanted it to do. It erased me. With my hair pulled back into a severe knot, I looked like a tired ghost. I walked through the front door, and the house smelled of expensive floral arrangements and roasted tenderloin. Evelyn was in the living room, furiously adjusting a stack of linen napkins. She looked up, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. A tight, satisfied smile crept onto her face. "Good," she said, not bothering with a hello. "You look perfectly fine. Unobtrusive. Now put your bag in the hall closet and get into the kitchen. The caterers backed out at the last minute, so you are on appetizer duty." "Wait, what?" I asked, stopping in my tracks. "You want me to serve the food?" "Do not start with me, Harper," she hissed, her eyes flashing with that familiar warning. "Olivia's parents are accustomed to a certain standard. I need everything to run smoothly. You are going to stay in the kitchen, plate the crab cakes, and bring them out during the cocktail hour. Keep your head down, do not interrupt the adults, and if anyone asks, remember the story. You do data entry, now go." I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. I was 34 years old, a seasoned investigative journalist, and I had just been demoted to the family maid. But I remembered my father's desperate phone call. "Do not make a scene." So I walked into the kitchen, tied an apron over my gray dress, and started arranging crab cakes on a silver platter. An hour later, the doorbell rang. It sounded like a starting pistol. From the kitchen, I could hear the flurry of greetings. I heard Jackson's booming, practiced laugh. I heard Olivia's warm voice. And then, I heard a deep, resonant baritone that made my blood freeze in my veins. "It is a pleasure to finally meet the family," the voice said. "Jackson has told us so much about you." I knew that voice. I had spent 8 months listening to that voice dismantle corrupt politicians from a mahogany bench. I crept toward the swinging kitchen door and pushed it open just a fraction of an inch. Standing in my parents' living room, shaking my brother's hand, was Judge Harrison Sterling. Beside him was a sharply dressed woman with intelligent eyes, his wife. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack them. The room spun. The federal judge my mother was practically bankrupting herself to impress was the exact same man who had shaken my hand on Tuesday and told me I had a spine of steel. Before I could even process the sheer absurdity of the situation, the kitchen door swung inward, nearly hitting me in the face. Evelyn swept into the room, her eyes wild with adrenaline. "What are you doing standing there?" she whispered fiercely. "Bring the tray out, and remember, keep your mouth shut." I picked up the heavy silver tray. My hands were shaking slightly. I pushed through the door and walked into the living room. The moment I stepped out, Evelyn's entire demeanor shifted. She became the perfect, gracious hostess, but her words were laced with poison designed specifically for me. "Oh, look, our little helper has arrived," Evelyn announced brightly, waving a hand in my direction as if I were a hired teenager from down the street. "Everyone, grab a bite. Harper, do not just stand there, take it to the guests." I walked toward the group, my head ducked slightly, hiding behind the sheer humiliation of the moment. I offered the tray to Olivia first. She took a crab cake, but her smile faltered as she looked at me. She was a nurse. She was trained to notice subtle signs of distress, and she was already picking up on the strange, toxic frequency humming beneath my mother's bubbly facade. "Thank you," Olivia said softly. "You are Harper, right? Jackson's sister? Since he did not mention you were helping with the catering." Before I could open my mouth, Evelyn was suddenly right beside me, a hand clamped firmly onto my shoulder. Her fingers dug into my collarbone like talons. "Oh, Harper is not catering," Evelyn laughed, a high, brittle sound. "She is just helping out. Harper lives up in the city, doing administrative work. Data entry, mostly. Very tedious, quiet work for a quiet girl. Nothing as exciting as what Jackson does. Speaking of which, Harrison, did Jackson tell you about his new regional logistics contract?" She physically turned her back on me, cutting me out of the circle, herding the judge and his wife toward Jackson. Judge Sterling had not even gotten a good look at my face. Between the dim mood lighting, my frumpy dress, and my mother's aggressive maneuvering, I was exactly what she wanted me to be. Invisible. For the next 45 minutes, I was subjected to a masterclass in psychological warfare. Evelyn kept me moving. She ordered me to fetch more ice. She commanded me to wipe up a microscopic spill on the end table. Every time I paused, every time it looked like someone might ask me a question, she threw a velvet-wrapped knife. Harper does not like to talk much. She is very introverted, she told the judge's wife when she noticed her looking at me. Harper has always struggled to find her footing. She sighed to Olivia, loud enough for me to hear while I was refilling the wine glasses. We are just glad she has a steady desk job now. Jackson stood by the fireplace, nursing a scotch, basking in the glow of Judge Sterling's attention. He watched our mother treat me like a servant, and he did absolutely nothing. He just smiled his golden boy smile and talked about his imaginary corporate team. Finally, it was time for dinner. Evelyn directed everyone to the grand dining table. She placed Jackson at the center, flanked by Olivia and her parents. She placed my father at one end, and she pointed me to the darkest corner of the table, a tiny chair shoved right up against the swinging kitchen door, practically in the hallway. I sat down. I smoothed the rough fabric of my gray dress. I looked at the glittering crystal, the polished silver, and the people laughing around the table. My mother thought she had won. She thought she had successfully buried me alive in the shadows. But as the first course was cleared, and Judge Sterling stood up, buttoned his jacket, and tapped his knife against his champagne flute to make his toast, I realized something. My mother had not buried me. She had just planted a bomb under her own table, and the timer had just hit 0. I drove back to Chicago that night in complete silence. My phone was blowing up in the passenger seat, illuminating the dark car with frantic text messages from my mother, but I did not even glance at it. The ghost of her screaming still rang in my ears. I had just detonated the family archive. I had set fire to my mother's fictional empire. For the first time in 34 years, my hands were entirely steady on the steering wheel. I thought the explosion at the dining table was the end of it. I thought that by walking out of that house, the worst was finally behind me. I was wrong. Desperate people do not just surrender when their illusions are shattered, they double down. It was Tuesday morning, 4 days after the dinner. I was back in my element. I was sitting at my desk in the sprawling, glass-walled newsroom of the Chicago Herald, surrounded by the hum of ringing phones and the clatter of keyboards. I was wearing a sharp, tailored suit, holding a hot cup of coffee, reviewing a new set of court transcripts. I was Harper, the investigative journalist again. The shadow girl in the gray sweater dress was dead. Then, my desk phone buzzed. It was the head of building security down in the main lobby. "Harper," the guard said, sounding tense. "There is a woman down here demanding to see you. She is causing quite a scene. She says she is your mother, but she is refusing to sign the visitor log and she is yelling at the reception staff. Do you want us to call the police?" My blood ran cold. Evelyn. She had actually driven 3 hours into the city, navigating the downtown traffic she terrified of, just to confront me on my own turf. "No," I said, standing up, my voice remarkably calm. "Do not call the police. I will be right down." I took the elevator down to the ground floor. The doors slid open to the massive, polished marble lobby of the Herald building. And there she was. Evelyn looked entirely out of place. Without the carefully arranged backdrop of her suburban home, without her dinner table and her perfect centerpieces, she just looked small and frantic. Her hair was slightly disheveled. She was clutching her designer purse like a weapon, glaring at the 2 security guards who had positioned themselves between her and the elevator banks. "Mom?" I said, my voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. "What are you doing here?" She spun around. Her eyes were red-rimmed and manic. The moment she saw me, she marched forward, her heels clicking aggressively against the marble. "You are going to fix this," she hissed, her voice vibrating with a rage so deep it was almost unrecognizable. "You are going to fix what you broke, Harper. Right now." I crossed my arms, maintaining a physical distance from her. "Fix what, exactly?" "Jackson," she cried, throwing a hand in the air, ignoring the stares of the journalists and executives walking through the lobby. "Olivia packed her bags on Sunday. She went to stay with her parents." She told him the engagement is off unless he agrees to months of couples counseling and admits to everything. He is devastated, Harper. His life is ruined, and it is entirely your fault. I stared at her, genuinely astounded by the sheer depth of her delusion. It is my fault? I asked softly. Mom, you lied to a federal judge. Jackson lied to the woman he was supposed to marry. It was a harmless exaggeration, she snapped, stepping closer, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. We were protecting his future. Now, you are going to get your phone out. You are going to call Judge Sterling. You have his number, right? You are going to call him and tell him that you made it all up. I blinked. I actually thought I had misheard her. You want me to do what? You will tell him you were jealous, she commanded, pointing a trembling finger at my chest. Tell him you exaggerated your job because you were jealous of Jackson's success. Tell him you lied to make a scene because you are emotionally unstable. If you take the blame, if you tell them Jackson had nothing to do with it, Olivia might come back. You owe him this, Harper. The absolute audacity of her demand hit me like a physical blow. She had driven all the way to my place of work, the place where I had fought and bled to build a respected reputation, to demand that I commit professional suicide. She wanted me to call a federal judge and confess to being a liar, just to stitch her fake reality back together. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I did not feel anger. I did not feel that familiar, suffocating childhood guilt. I just felt profound, overwhelming pity. Mom, I said, my voice dropping so low she had to lean in to hear me. I am standing in the lobby of one of the largest newspapers in the country. Upstairs, I have a desk covered in federal court documents. I am a respected professional. You are asking me to burn my own life to the ground so Jackson can keep pretending he is someone he is not. I am your mother, she shrieked, her face flushing a deep, angry purple. You will do as I say, as— No, I will not, I replied, my voice steady as stone. You have no power here. You cannot curate this room. You cannot push me into a dark corner. The mantle test is over, Mom. I am not playing anymore. She opened her mouth to scream, raising her purse as if she might actually strike me. But before she could make a sound, I raised my hand and looked at the two security guards who had been watching the entire exchange. Gentlemen, I said, my tone completely professional. This woman is trespassing. She is no longer welcome in this building. Please escort her off the premises. If she tries to return, call the police. Evelyn froze. The color completely drained from her face. She looked at the guards stepping toward her, and then she looked at me. The realization finally crashed over her. The invisible daughter in the gray dress was gone, and the woman standing in front of her was utterly untouchable. You cannot do this to me, she whimpered, the venom suddenly draining out of her, replaced by a pathetic panic. Harper, I am your mother. Goodbye, Mom, I said. I turned my back on her and walked toward the elevators. I did not look back. I listened to the sound of her protesting as the guards firmly guided her out through the revolving glass doors. I stepped into the elevator, pressed the button for my floor, and watched the doors slide shut, sealing her out of my world for good. The umbilical cord of guilt was finally cut, but the fallout from that night was not entirely over, because 2 days after I threw my mother out of the Herald building, I received a phone call from an unknown number. And the person on the other end of the line was the absolute last person I ever expected to hear from. The unknown number on my screen had a suburban area code. I stared at it for a long moment, the adrenaline from my confrontation with Evelyn still thrumming in my veins. Finally, I answered. Hello? Harper? It is Olivia. Her voice was exhausted, stripped of all the polite, bubbly energy she had carried at the dinner party. I am sorry to bother you at work. If you are open to it, I would really like to buy you a cup of coffee. I need to hear the truth without your mother directing the conversation. We met the following Tuesday at a quiet, independent cafe a few blocks from the Herald building. Olivia looked entirely different. The polished, picture-perfect future daughter-in-law was gone, replaced by a woman in a plain denim jacket holding a steaming mug of tea like a lifeline. She did not waste time with small talk. "Your mother told my parents you were deeply unwell," she said quietly, looking me right in the eye. "She implied you had severe psychological issues, that living in the city had broken your grip on reality, and that Jackson was your primary caretaker from afar. She told us we had to walk on eggshells around you so we would not trigger an episode." I let out a harsh, disbelieving breath. I knew Evelyn was spinning a story, but I had not realized she had completely pathologized my independence to make Jackson look like a saint. "And Jackson?" I asked. "He let her say it," Olivia replied, her eyes flashing with a sharp, lingering anger. "He admitted it to me on Sunday. He said he did not want to rock the boat, that it was just easier to let your mom handle the narrative. But I told him that I refuse to marry into a family that requires a sacrificial lamb just to function." She took a sip of her tea, her hands steady. "We called off the wedding. We are on a break. I told him he needs to start intensive therapy to figure out who he actually is when his mother is not feeding him lines. If he cannot learn to stand up to her, and if he cannot apologize to you, I am gone for good." I respected Olivia immensely in that moment. She was not playing the victim. She was a woman drawing a massive, immovable line in the sand. A month after that coffee date, my phone rang again. This time, Jackson's name flashed on the screen. I almost let it go to voicemail, but a tiny ounce of hope made me swipe to answer. "Harper," he said. His voice cracked immediately. He sounded incredibly small, like a child who had just woken up from a fever dream. "I am so sorry." It was not a clean, rehearsed, PR-approved apology. It was messy and painful. He admitted how intoxicating it was to let our mother inflate his life, and how utterly cowardly it was to let her tear mine down to maintain his illusion. He told me his new therapist was making him confront the brutal reality that his entire adult identity was a house of cards built by Evelyn. "I do not expect you to forgive me anytime soon," he said, his breathing ragged over the line. "I just needed to tell you that you did not ruin my life that night. You saved me from living a fake one." It was a start. It was a fragile, terrifying little bridge over a massive canyon of resentment, but it was a start. Evelyn, predictably, went completely silent. There were no more manic text messages, no guilt trips, no passive-aggressive social media posts. It felt like a system that had critically overheated and been forced to shut down. It took 6 full months before my father finally called. He nervously asked if I would be willing to come over for a quiet Sunday lunch. Just the 3 of us. No guests, no performances. I agreed. I drove down on a rainy afternoon. I wore my favorite, sharpest blazer. I did not park down the street to hide my car. I pulled my sedan right into the center of the driveway. When I walked into the living room, the first thing I noticed was the glass coffee table. It was completely bare. The massive, oxblood leather family archive was gone. It was not on the shelves, it was not on the mantel. It had been packed away, banished to the attic or the basement. It was a silent, monumental concession. The empire of lies had fallen, and reality was finally moving in. My mother walked in from the kitchen. She looked a little older, a little less tightly wound. She did not hug me, and she did not offer a grand, tearful apology, but she poured me a glass of iced tea, sat down across from me, and looked at me without trying to look through me. "So," she said, her voice hesitant but genuine, "what kind of investigation are you working on at the newspaper right now?" It was a basic question, the kind any normal parent might ask. But for us, it was a revolution. For the first time in my life, she was asking me to speak instead of telling me to stay quiet. Here is the ultimate truth I want to leave you with today. If you are sitting at a table in your own life where the price of admission is making yourself small, you need to hear this. Love that demands you shrink is not love, it is management. People who ask you to hide your accomplishments, your personality, or your truth so they can feel comfortable are not protecting you. They are protecting the fragile, fictional narrative they tell about themselves. You do not owe anyone a smaller version of yourself just to keep their imaginary world intact. The night I stood up at that dinner table, I thought I was going to lose my family. But what I actually lost was the suffocating role they had forced me to play, and I gained my freedom. If someone has ever treated you like a background character in your own family, I want to ask you a question. If you could look them in the eye right now, without fear, and say one single sentence to them, what would it be? Write it down. Leave it in the comments below. Let it out into the universe. Because the first person who needs to know you are absolutely done shrinking is you.